Yeah, we'll start because we've got Valerie confirmed that we've got only 3, not 4 papers in this panel. Okay, so I think that you can speak 3 minutes more. You've got 3 minutes more time to speak, and I think that the solution with the discussion after the whole speeches will be the better solution. Maybe if somebody will be very got some important question and must make this question after the speeches, it will be also possible. So the first speaker will be Anna Svietlova, Jagiellonian University, and the title of the paper is Culture Heroes of Late Socialism and the Representation in Modern Russia Culture. Anna, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nice, good. Okay, and now I will share my screen. And yeah, okay. Yes, okay. Can you hear the presentation? Can you see the presentation now? Great. Yes, okay, so hello. I'm very happy and excited to be here with you all. St. Petersburg is my hometown. I was born and raised there, and now I'm working at my PhD project at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and I'm trying to examine culture sources of the way contemporary Russian audiovisual media, cinema and television, depict Soviet Union. And what I'm going to present you today is actually a part of the bigger phenomenon, which is the fact that after the turn of 2011-2012, the number of such audiovisual texts has increased markedly, and you can't explain their appearance in media discourse just as the result of deliberate government's policy. We have varied Soviet-themed productions, films aspiring to be called blockbusters, entertaining comedies, drama series, as well as so-called festival films, and all of them are created by people in different social positions and with diverse political views. This is why in my presentation I choose 2 examples which seem to be different but at the same time representative ones. The first one is Peter Buslav's film Vysotsky, Thank You for Being Alive, Vysotsky, Спасибо, что живой, from 2011. It was produced by Konstantin Ernst, the chief executive officer of Channel 1 Russia, and by Anatoly Maximov. The script was written by the musician's son, Nikita Vysotsky, with some help from the others. The plot of the story was told by musician's friend, actor Vsevolod Abdulov. It was the story about the clinical death that Vysotsky allegedly experienced during his semi-legal tour in Central Asia in 1979, exactly 1 year before his actual death in July 1980. According to Nikita Vysotsky, the film was intended primarily for the younger audience. It was to compete with bold blockbusters, and so the story had to be told in modern film language. In addition to 2-hour version broadcasted in cinemas, there is also a 4-episode series, Vysotsky 4 часа настоящей жизни, released in 2013, and the book version of the script, so-called film novel, Kinopovest. The film premiere was sustained by a large-scale advertising campaign, and basically the whole production can be defined as a commercial one, at least that was the intention, and initiated somehow by the elites dominating the media discourse. The second example is the film Summer, Lето, directed by Kirill Serebrennikov, the artistic director of the Gogol Center in Moscow. He was till last year, who has been described as one of Russia's leading theater directors and at the same time one of the most rebellious ones. During the filming of Lето, Serebrennikov was arrested, and his case was perceived by many as apparently the political one. He edited the final version of the film being under house arrest, and of course he was not at the premiere, which was quite noticeable. Leta is usually defined as a film about Viktor Tsoi. Also, those who watched it know that he's not exactly the main character there. It is rather Mike Naumenko, who appears as a more experienced mentor, and his wife, Natalia. It is her story that the script, written by Serebrennikov together with Mikhail and Lila Idov, is based on. The film is about the life of Leningrad Rock Club in the very beginning of the 80s, just at the moment when Tsoi came there. It can be unambitiously defined as a film d'auteur, full of various artistic devices, often theatrical rather than the cinematic. It was presented at the Cannes Festival. Also, it did not receive any awards other than a special Cannes Soundtrack Award. So, we have two various productions set in different social and political modern contexts. The question is whether they can be considered as equal parts of the one phenomena. First of all, in both of them, one of the key issues is the biographical myth of important figure in Soviet culture. Myth is defined here as a work of collective imagination that reflects audience ideas about particular artists as heroes of specified culture era. In case of Vladimir Vysotsky, his biographical myth began to emerge during his lifetime. It was based on the real and fictional facts of his biography, his songs, his poetry, his cinema and theatrical roles. In Petr Buslov's movie, real facts are intertwined with fictional events, and some elements of the myth appear practically unchanged, while others are reduced and modified. Moreover, some aspects acquired almost metaphysical, evangelical meaning. Vysotsky's miraculous victories over death, shown there, can be seen as the story about patient death and resurrection, as it was described previously by Anton Afanasyev and Anton Dolin. In Summer movie, we are not dealing with one biographical myth, but rather with a generalized mythology of the Leningrad Rock Club. The love triangle between Mike, Victor, and Natalia, which we can see in the center of the plot, is rather a fictional story. To complement it, the authors visualize some of Mike's songs, for example, Moya Sladkaya N, as well as some elements of rock folklore, like angels painting the pointer god above Boris Grebenshchikov's front door. Most of the characters are either real people or conventional figures with the real prototypes. Some events took place in reality. Some were distorted there for the sake of the plot, and some are explicitly shown as the characters' fantasies. The theatrical convention allows introducing the figure of skeptic, who breaks the fourth wall and addresses the audience directly with the words, "It did not happen," or expresses viewers' assumed claims against the characters. Further, in both movies, the collective imagination is superimposed with deeply personal perspective. Natalia Naumenko's and some other prototypes' memories originally were supposed to be a part of the movie, but in the end, they were edited into a separate documentary called After the Summer. And the personal perspective of Nikita Vysotsky is directly shown in the culmination of the film. Vysotsky's fight for his life is metaphorically shown through his memory, when he's dying suddenly with him in the past, pushing the car stuck in the mud in which he was driving with his first wife and sons. The camera focuses on the little boy, Nikita, who watches his father's action with silent admiration. According to Svetlana Bohm's classification, such a perspective could be an example of reflective nostalgia that cherishes shattered fragments of memory related to historical and individual time. Contrary to restorative nostalgia, which tries to reconstruct emblems and rituals of the lost past in an attempt to conquer and specialize time, reflective nostalgia admits the senselessness of such action. All the more interesting seemed to be the problem both films are trying to cope with. The fact that no actor can restore the presence of the culture hero on the screen, can incarnate into him and be totally accepted by the audience. The creators of Summer openly admit the helplessness through an artistic device. The character of Tsoi is created there by three people. He is played by the Korean actor Tae Yoo, is voiced by Russian musician Denis Klever, and all the songs are sung by Pyotr Pogadaev, who was almost unknown before the film. The external resemblance to the prototype turns out to be rather conditional, and in response to the expected claims, again, the figure of skeptic appears. He looks at Tsoi and immediately says to the camera, "Does not look like him." Of course, Tsoi's fan, not all of them, but many hated this film anyway. But as for historian Vysotski's character, the impracticability of the task is also shown on screen, but as if contrary to the creator's intentions. Their primary goal, as they confessed, was to maximize the external resemblance to the protagonist to Vysotsky, so that the viewer had the impression that the artist himself appeared on the screen. To achieve the desired effect, they used a special silicone mask, computer technologies of those times, and the voice of Nikita Vysotsky. The name of the actor hidden behind the mask did not appear in the credits. There was just Vladimir Vysotsky as the main performer. He was not announced either before or after the premiere. Thus, they tried to avoid any unnecessary associations with the image of the popular actor. The effect of the experiment was quite the opposite. As the main drawback of the film, the reviewers mentioned the protagonist's terrifying impersonality, his striking artificiality, which did not create the illusion of Vysotski's temporary resurrection, but also had a negative impact on the acting. Even before the premiere, there was a rumor that the real performer of Vysotsky's role is Sergei Bezrukov, a popular Russian actor known for his role of significant figures such as poets Alexander Pushkin, Sergei Yesenin. There was also this famous joke that do not fear death, fear that after it you will be played by Bezrukov. And once the film was released, soon it became clear that keeping his name secret no longer made sense. And in 2012, he confirmed in popular TV talk show that he played the role of Vysotsky. And when the 4-episode series appeared on screen, his name was already mentioned in the credit in the first place. Nevertheless, Bezrukov also appears in credits in movie version as a performer of Yuri Chernov, a young actor from Taganka Theatre. This character appears on screen only once in the first scene with Vysotsky. The viewer should guess that Yuri is preparing to replace Vysotsky in the famous play Pugachev, based on Sergei Yesenin's poem of the same title. This scene seems completely redundant for the narrative, just like its only function is to confuse the audience with the appearance of Bezrukov and Vysotsky in one frame. However, in a TV version and in the script, the context of this character's appearance is quite different. And I will try to show it to you now, just a short fragment. I hope everything will work. All right. Yes, just a moment. Okay.
Я 3 дня и 3 ночи блуждал по тропам, солнце рыл глазами удачу, ветер волосы мои, как солому трепал, и цепами дождя обволачивал. Но сломленное сердце никогда не заблудится, и эту голову шеи сшибить нелегко. Оренбургская заря красношерстной верблюдицей рассветное роняла мне в рот молоко, и холодное корявое вымя сквозь тьму прижимал я, как хлеб, к истощенным векам. Проведите! Проведите меня к нему! Я хочу видеть этого человека! Проведите! Почему он без костюма репетирует?
Почему артист без костюма? Где костюм на артиста?
Костюм шьют. Не можем же мы дать ему штаны Высоцкого.
Это как прикажете понимать? В театре нет и быть не может штанов Высоцкого. В театре есть костюм Хлопуши.
Будет перерыв, вы
Okay,
подойдите.
and
Если он согласен, я вам все подпишу.
one more.
Сейчас поспим.
Almost there. So yeah, this is the first appearance of the character on screen in this TV series version. So first we see the rehearsal scene, yeah, and actually it's kind of a gradual introduction of the culture hero here. First, we hear the idea of Vysotsky as irreplaceable to great artist. Then the hero's shadow appears on the screen, and only then we see himself in a flash. At the same time, it is significant that the actor who is unable to replace Vysotsky is played by Bezrukov. The viewer observes how the artist stands on the Taganka stage and deliberately poorly reads the legendary monologue of Yesenin's character, Chlapusha, that was important not only for Vysotsky, but also for Yesenin himself. This scene once again emphasizes the importance of Vysotsky as a culture hero, but at the same time recognizes the impracticability of the conceived project. Vysotsky cannot be replaced. Even a very talented actor is unable to create the illusion of his resurrection and restore his physical presence on the screen. Finally, both films seem to pretend to be biopics, but in fact only use as significant figures for more general Soviet themes narrative. Moreover, they both are set in the same period of Soviet history, Brezhnev stagnation, or more extensive, the era of late socialism. According to Alexei Yurchak, this place occupies a special place in Soviet history as culture and social life then was undergoing changes that he called hypernormalization. Many Soviet citizens generally accepted fundamental values of the socialist state. Nevertheless, they routinely transgressed them and reinterpret in various ways, giving new meanings to public activities and ritual created during earlier totalitarian culture. Instead of common binary model, a direct opposition of official and unofficial culture, public self and private self, Yurchak introduces the category of being vне, outside the system, that was not fully recognized by the citizens themselves, and at the same time was leading to the constant toning of the state ideology inside out. Not arguing now whether this concept is correct or not, I think it's important to look at the picture of Soviet world in films also from this point of view. In the film about Vysotsky, the plot focuses not on his artistic works, indeed, but on his relationship with the state system. The political actors are equally important characters there, and each of them has a role to play in his biographical myth. From the very beginning, the tour in Central Asia is a threat. The local KGB is carrying out an operation to catch the organizers of illegal concerts, and Vysotsky turns out to be a convenient, well-known name. For Vysotsky, his inner freedom, the rejection of any values imposed from above, is crucially important. Nevertheless, this feature is rather declarative one than leading to any actions. Vysotsky is presented not as an active fighter against the Soviet regime, but more as its passive victim, despite the fact that he's perfectly aware of what is going on and resists it internally. However, I would not describe his attitude as a representative example of being vně. Maybe it can be observed in case of other characters, as almost none of them perceive the signs of totalitarian ideology in their original meanings. But in the case of Samar, this category seems to be crucial to understand the sources of one of the major contradictions between audience expectations and what is portrayed on the screen. I perfectly remember how the movie was announced in Poland, in some other countries, and in certain circles in Russia. Basically, the fact of the house arrest of the director and its political context became a marketing device, again contrary to the creator's intentions. Along with the stereotypical image of rock musicians as rebels who openly oppose the system, it created specific expectations that have not met. Instead, we see young people who exist within the state system, but live and create just as the Soviet state does not matter at all. They interpret the elements of the totalitarian ideology and language in many ways. For example, they bet what there will be said in news first, 100,000 tons of something or Dia Leonid Ilyich, just for fun. They accept comic attempts by the management of the rock club to feed their work into the canons of social realism. And the authorities there are rather funny than scary, as they all seem to understand that the entire ideological agenda is just a background. No one needs rules by which they all continue to play. The only moment when the cruel reality appears is the medical evaluation board, where the drummer of Tsoy's band is forced to go before being sent to Afghanistan. But even that episode is quickly forgotten by the others against the background of the impersonal conflicts and the desperate desire to be like Western idols from the covers of the vinyl records. And now just one more short fragment, and after that I will move to the conclusion. Okay, so basically that's the scene that takes place right after the home concert, Kvartirnik, that we see. And after the discussion whether the musicians, like Mike, should or not try to go to West and present their music there. And yeah, let me just move a bit forward.
Well, Billy rap all night about his suicide, Howard kicking the head, and he was 25.
Yeah, let's go.
Oh man, it's too young, got to run. All the young dudes carry the news. Boogaloo dudes carry the news. All the young dudes carry the news. Boogaloo dudes carry the news. All the young dudes carry the news. Boogaloo dudes carry the news. All the young dudes carry the news. Carry the news.
Okay, let's stop here. So basically, we see here this kind of imaginary home concert, Kvartirnik, as it could look like in a free West, as it is imagined by Mike, and of course also his attempt to imagine all of them in the place of famous Western musicians. Conventional Leningrad of the early 80s appears here as a world that lives with the dream of imaginary West, one of being vне spaces that Jurczak describes, the one they produced locally, drawing foreign symbols, alphabets, and images. It is also indirectly indicated at the very beginning of the film, when the Soviet adaptation of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is shown on TV somewhere in the background, and Mike comments on this. Pestboard England on the Baltic Moor. This is not the USSR, but also not the West, just a third place, which is quite comfortable. Basically, Mike realized the secondary, the pasteboard nature of the world they create. And in this scene with this imaginary home concert, it is manifested especially clear. The character's fantasy is intertwined with realistic events from the plot, and David Bowie's song is performed by the band Shot Paris, known for their uncompromising attitude toward the modern Russian authorities. To conclude this quick overview, both films definitely can be considered as part of the same phenomena. As the saying goes, the devil is in detail. And of course, it's important to analyze such kind of popular nostalgic narratives in a relation to the contemporary context, but not to mistake persuasive acting of the state apparatus with an unconscious replication of ideological patterns by film's creators and the audience, who may have various intentions as well as their own ideas of the Soviet past and its culture heroes. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm aware I haven't covered many important aspects, but I will be happy to answer your question. And I know some other speakers will analyze those films also later. So I'm looking forward to know your points of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, very much. As you say, we've got another speech about the same movies, so we can compare to different or maybe the same point of view about Kirill Serebnikov's Lieto, and I announced that Eric Vleming and Qiwen Wu. Okay, I'm sorry if I if I pronounce your names in not very good way, but the floor is yours, and remaining Soviet rocks masculinity in Kirill Serebnikov's Lieto. So the same movie, different point of view.
Maybe. Let's see. Great, thank you, Arkadiusz. I'm going to try to share the screen first. Do you see anything yet?
We see, but not the presentation in this moment. We see your computer. Yeah, now it's okay.
You see something?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then I guess. Yes. Okay. Then we're going to continue. Maybe on the same wave. Maybe different. Dear all, very good morning. It's still morning here in Berlin. Let me first express our gratitude to the organizers for making this conference happen in the still not so easy times. With our presentation, Reimagining Soviet Rock Masculinity in Kirill Serebrenikov's Lieto, Summer, we aim to enrich our common discussion by focusing on the interrelation between freedom, gender, and Russianness, and how it relates to the process of post-Soviet cultural recycling. The notion of freedom is deeply rooted in Russia's intellectual, social, cultural, and political history, and plays a key role in the definition of free Soviet, and post-Soviet Russian national identity. This is not different since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and is very much true today, as the observation of a steep decline in the level of freedom is never far away. Often viewed as an aspect or a consequence of the so-called conservative turn, generally understood as a structured, organized counter-reaction to liberalism from the 90s, the tendency towards conservatism and anti-liberalism has root in the early 90s, but took politically shape in 2012, 2014, to be largely erased from public discourse since 2014. Its values, however, most notably religion, nationalism, and patriotism, have been integrated in all spheres of society and were even adopted in the constitution by popular referendum in 2020. While its core purpose is political, its effects on society are very real. And this cannot be disconnected from the continuous memory politics and even the manipulation of nostalgia, which have become an integral part of both the cultural and political discourse and ubiquitous in daily life, again since the 90s. This is well reflected in culture, which has becoming a real battlefield for projecting political agendas, as the gray zone between artistic freedom on the one hand and propaganda and protest aesthetics on the other hand is fading away at a worrying speed. Although this is reflected in literature and even in fine arts, it particularly takes shape in cinema, where above all the historical genre, which has been booming since the fall of the Soviet Union, lends itself to political projection, for instance, through the recycling of Soviet heroes. Often associated solely with sponsored cinema and then especially blockbusters, political agendas are not alien to non-state promoted cinema either. A key personality in this discussion is Kirill Serebrennikov, a controversial theater and filmmaker whose oeuvre has resonated across the world, often for its underlying political tones. He is very critical vis-à-vis the current regime and President Putin, and outspoken liberal on topics such as freedom, LGBT matters, and democracy. Notably are his film The Student, which plays upon the conservative turn, religious extremism, and homosexuality, or the film Lieta, the focus of our discussion, so we continue the discussion on this, which features an account about the Leningrad rock scene and which presents a controversial biopic about Soviet rock legends Viktor Tsoi and Mike Naumenko. Against the background of the current socio-political and cultural tendencies, we ask whether and how the memory of the Soviet rock is recycled and how we might interpret this in the very same context. To do so, we deploy a gender angle, and more particular, the angle of masculinity. The choice to study cultural recycling, memory politics, or nostalgia through a critical reading of the representation of masculinity is not new, and is particularly relevant in the contemporary post-Soviet society, where gender politics are a fundamental asset in the toolbox of the conservative turn. We can think more particularly about the institutionalized tendency to push gender orthodoxy in various spheres of society with the purpose of rethinking Russia's national identity, according to conservative and traditionalist lines. The link between memory and national identity construction is well summarized in Duncan Bell's notion of national mythscape, defined as the temporarily and spatially extended discursive realm wherein the struggle for control of people's memories and the formation of nationalist myths is debated, contested, and subverted incessantly. The mythscape is the page upon which the multiple and often conflicting nationalist narratives are rewritten. It is the perpetually mutating repository for the representation of the past for the purposes of the present. Finally, we share our understanding of masculinity. In our analysis, we approach masculinity as a complex, variable, and socio-cultural gender expression. This understanding is grounded in a socio-constructivist and non-essentialist reading of gender identity. We take particular inspiration from Raymond Connell's notions of hegemonic masculinity, which paved the way towards the nuanced understanding of masculine identities, stressing the plural, distinguishing hegemonic patriarchal models, as well as subordinated, complicit, and marginalized forms of masculinities. It will be the connection between hegemonic models of masculinity and its role in the sustaining or disrupting of ideological and political discourses, which is the major discussion, which is the major focus in our discussion and reading of the film.
So when rock was first introduced into the Soviet Union during the 1950s, it was considered by the authorities as Western contamination that might jeopardize the socialist mission. It started with imitation of the Western prototype and didn't come to have its own distinct identity until the 1980s. In face of this musical and ideological infiltration of the West, the USSR's first reaction was to condemn it and try to nip it in the bud, but it went without success. So official rock clubs were founded to administer and curb its impact. Examples are Melody and Rhythm Cafe in Moscow, as well as the Leningrad Rock Club, where the film Lieta is set. The club censored and approved rock songs before they could be performed in the concerts, and that were organized and supervised by the authorities. Soviet rock started to really bloom in the era of perestroika. Bands like Aquarium, Kino, Alisa, Nautilus, Pompidous, DDT, and many others stayed no longer underground and were present in all media, including film. For example, the 1988 rock film, Asa, first introduced Soviet rock to the mainstream, and Kino's ending performance of I Want Change brought the band a national fame, and for many people, I Want Change is the song of perestroika. The founder of Kino, Victor Tsoi, also starred in Kazakh new wave film The Needle. He completed his entire soundtrack. He was also included together with many other rock musicians in 1988 documentary Rock, where people can have a glimpse of their lives offstage. Choi's premature death in 1990 did not stop his legacy from continuing to inspire and influence people. Until today, more and more films and current concerts have been made in memory of him and the power his music brings. The film Lieta is one of those tributes to the golden time of the Soviet rock. It pictures the rock community in Leningrad during the early 1980s, and inspired by the biographies of Mike Naumenko and Victor Tsoi. It tells the story of these two rock musicians' friendship, mentorship, and differing of paths. In black and white, the mise-en-scène of the communal apartments and other props in the film easily sum up a sense of bygones and a Soviet past. Still, the film was heavily criticized of misportraying the rock community by rock veterans like Boris Gribechikov, who what cannot be neglected, however, is a reflexive emphasis on the fictionality prevailing throughout the film. So for example, there are two imaginary characters in the film that clearly serve this self-reflexivity. One is the camera person who is always filming the rock community. And in Ryab Chikova's words, this camera person can be seen as a stand-in for the director himself. And his documentary sequences are often framed in animated and scribbled albums and showcased within the main body of Lieta. So the merging of two film worlds, as well as the constant reference to the presence of a camera, allude to Serebrennikov's subjectivity in this cinematic presentation of Soviet rock past. Another imaginary character is Skeptic, as Anna also mentioned. If we say the camera person is a subtle hint at reflexivity, then Skeptic is clearly a fourth wall breaker, as his name indicates. Looking at Victor, he comments directly to the audience that the actor doesn't look like Toy. He also introduced many fantasy interludes that imagine radicalized reactions like confronting the authorities or interrupting the social order, only to denounce them in the end by turning to the audience to say this did not happen. A sense of disappointment towards characters in action or apathy is therefore provoked. So the incorporation of these two imaginary characters manifests Serebrennikov's agenda of presenting a subjective interpretation of the Soviet rock past, building upon Bell's concept of national mythscape. I argue that it's by contextualizing the musical and cultural phenomenon during the era of perestroika, as well as the intertextual references to the rock films made by his forerunners, that Serebrennikov comments on the current Russian under the conservative turn. More concretely, the very subjective characterization and presentation of Mike and Victor in the film represents two distinct rock masculinity ideals that either pose a challenge or offer an inspiration to the current unfavorable policy in the field of culture and art in Russia. So to our first rock masculinity ideal, Mike, when the film starts, he already has a name in the rock scene and a say in the club. Always surrounded by his supporters and respected by peers, he has a beautiful wife who loves and admires him, and as well as a lovely son. At first sight, he might be called an example of hegemonic masculinity in the context of rock. But behind all the glamour, what the film also spotlights is many moments of his passivity and powerlessness. To start with is his submissive and cooperative attitude towards the authorities. In their first meeting, Mike immediately advises Victor to add "mama, mama" after "I'm a slacker" in order to tune down parasitism and circumvent censorship. For in the authorities' opinion, rock is essentially anti-Soviet and a rock musician is the slacker. Here, Mike's suggestion to Victor implies he knows very well the rules of the authorities and consciously plays by them. He also helps Victor get a permit to perform at the club. His close association with this USSR's scheme of institutionalizing rock makes his music a product of compromise and self-institutionalization. So in constant self-censorship, he stays unprogressive to maintain the status quo, for he believes it's okay in the swamp, especially your number one toad. Thus, we can say he's the rock hero favored and advocated by the authorities. Another reason his rock is harmless in the authorities' eyes is the lack of real rock spirit. The 1980s Soviet had a new zeitgeist that corresponds to the very essence of rock and roll, that is protest and rebelliousness. When people are calling for change at the dawn of perestroika, he shows no engagement with the reality and continues to copy Western rock music style and lyrics. As Skeptic points out in the film, he might be called by his fans a lyric hero like Lou Reed or Bob Dylan. But unlike Reed or Dylan, his music is the music of a happy, well-adjusted guy, apathetic and out of context. What he represents is a man who cannot adapt to the new world and answer the call of the new era. Thus, he's doomed to be replaced by a new generation, which is also reflected in his marriage failure. After Victor enters the picture, Mike's wife Natasha becomes attracted by his talent and charisma, and her worship is no longer exclusive for her husband. When she confesses to her crush on Victor, Mike reacts with cynicism and literally pushes her towards Victor. So what we see here is the fragility of this rock masculinity ideal, who is passive and whose identity is subject to the dominating influence for the authorities or the West. As for Victor, let's start with a quote from Timothy Rebeck. Were a monument to be erected in grand Stalinist style to the heroes of socialist rock and roll, the statue would have to depict a young man in blue jeans, head thrust defiantly upward, and this long-haired warrior would clutch an electric guitar. So we recognize the details of this description in the monument of Troy in St. Petersburg. And we also recognize in the film that Victor is indeed presented as a warrior that always thrusts his head defiantly upward. Unlike Mike, he's a blue-collar boy with a sticky, without any endorsement from the authorities, and always insists on his independence. And this motive of upwatching is underscored throughout the letter as Victor's peculiarity that symbolizes his defiance against any compromise of autonomy, as well as his lifelong pursuit for freedom. For example, during the interview with the club, with his chin up till the end, he refuses to change anything when questioned by the authorities about the value of his music. This physical delineation is consistent with Troy's previous cinematic images. Before the grand finale in Asa, Troy is instructed by the restaurant manager that he can only perform according to the restaurant guidelines, to which he pays no attention. He storms out of the room and straight to the stage to sing the legendary "I Want Change." Apart from this highlight of upwatching, the image of Troy always involves an emphasis on physical strength. When the drunkard on chain accuses the rock gang of singing the enemy songs and being ungrateful to the state, Victor and the others go into a physical conflict with those mouthpieces of the state. There are focused shots of Victor kung fu poses and moves with the force and dexterity, which can be a reference to Troy's fascination with impersonating Bruce Lee in reality. And this physical combat against a dominating power is even more pronounced in Needle. As if it's tailored for Troy, this film tells the story of Morrow, the character, and his mission of crushing enslavement of any kind. After helping his ex-girlfriend break away from the drug dealer's control, He wins the fight with the drug dealer thugs with a scarred but proud face and upward chin. We might identify this motif of fighting or battling a rather essentialist approach in the presentation of Victor Tsoi's masculine image. But here, this physical power always promises spiritual gallantry and tenacity. In the Needle's famous ending sequence, after being seriously stabbed with a knife, Morrow continues to light his cigarette and walks away into the night as if nothing happens. As the company song goes, "Wish me some luck in the fight." This image of an unyielding warrior is indeed a recurring motif in Kino songs and becomes a significant aspect of Tsoi's masculine identity. Thus, in contrast to Mike's passivity and compromise, Tsoi's music brings out the real power of rock and roll. There is a call to resist any suppressing power and never surrender. A second aspect of Victor's masculine image also lies in his music. Reflecting his identity with blue collar boy, as mentioned above, his music is crude and unsophisticated. Of course, like Mike, his music was also influenced by his Western counterparts, but inheriting the Russian songwriting tradition of bard poetry, his songs depict the life of ordinary Russian people in simple but poetic words, true to life, as one of Mike's music illiterate neighbors comments after listening to Victor's songs. As Joyce remarks in the documentary Rock, he learns on the basis of his own observations not to take someone else's word for anything. In opposition to the propagandic programs on the TV, in his songs, we come to see the harshness, the darkness, and the idleness of everyday life in the Soviet Union. In the era of perestroika, people were calling for change and a better life. Tsoi's music speaks the voice of the ordinary Russian people and resonates with their frustration and hope, which demonstrates his engagement with this country and its people. So his masculine identity is in this way marked with the authentic Russianness.
To deepen our analysis of the rock masculinities featured in the film, we might recall the fact that throughout the Soviet history and various ideals of manhood coexisted. For a long period, for especially political reasons, the hailed model was that one of the Red Army soldier. After the death of Stalin, however, this model lost its main currency and became gradually replaced by more suitable models, such as the space hero on the one hand, and a variety of other masculinities not rarely inspired by the West on the other. Rock masculine identity represented one of these complex national identities, which was at the same time dominant, subversive, as well as repressed. Serebrenikov's take on rock masculinity is less nuanced, however, and follows the logic of a master and pupil relation towards a competition between two masculinity models representing different values and arguably generations. While Mike's masculine identity is initially characterized by virility, status, and conformity, which arguably brands his masculinity as hegemonic, it is soon overruled by Victor's more nonchalant and rebellious identity, initially a subordinated form of masculinity that is marked by the uncompromising value of unbound freedom. While this dynamic takes shape in various ways, personally, artistically, and socially, it can be viewed as the emasculation of the officially supported model of masculinity, and therefore of the state, and the disrupting expression of a new model fit for a new time, namely perestroika. These power dynamics cannot be disconnected from the question of national identity, as Serebrennikov chooses to portray Mike's masculine identity as government approved and therefore disconnected from the people, while he emphasizes Victor's close connection to the people hailing him as genuinely Russian. In his essentially portrayal of Soviet rock masculinity, Serebrennikov romanticizes the popular mythology of the Soviet rock scene and draws heavily on representations of rock stars featured in films such as Asa and The Needle, Igla. Against the background of the director's outspoken critical attitude towards the Putin regime, the recycling of the memory of Soviet rock masculinity can be read as a manifesto for freedom and creative thinking in current critical times, on the one hand, and a critique on the hollowness of institutionalized and submissive identities on the other. By appropriating the memory of the Soviet rock scene and, of course, of Viktor Tsoi, however, the movie finds itself on a road towards an unspoken statement, namely that change, either it is social, cultural, or even political, is inevitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a different point of view about Lieto, so I hope that discussion will be very hot. We skip from music to the spy stories because the next speeches will be connected with the Polish spy, Hans Kloss, between James Bond and Stirlitz. So we will find, but I hope that the problem of masculinity will still be present in the next speech. So Jarosław Grzechowiak, University of Łódź, remakes and reinterpretations life of Hans Kloss in Polish culture after 1989.
Thank you, Arkadiusz. I want to share the presentation, and I hope you can see it right now. Okay, thank you. So let's start. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jarosław Grzechowiak, and I am a PhD student at the University of Łódź. Thank you very much for the invitation for the conference. I want to share a few thoughts on the extremely popular Polish war espionage TV series Stawka większa niż życie, which roughly translates to More Than Life at Stake. The aforementioned popularity of this series lasts until today, which can be proven by countless replays on various TV channels in Poland. I would like to reflect on the footprint of this series in Polish culture after 1989 and on attempts to make films and TV series referring to the themes and dramaturgical construction of More Than Life at Stake. I assume that the Polish part of the audience knows this series very well. However, I have a short introduction for those of you who hear this title for the first time. More Than Life at Stake was shot in the second half of the 60s by two directors, Janusz Morgenstern and Andrzej Koniec. It was one of the first Polish television series. It told the story of a Pole, Stanisław Kolicki, a prisoner of a German camp, who illegally crossed the border of the Third Reich and the Soviet Union after escaping from the camp. Caught by Soviet soldiers, he goes to prison, and then the officers discover its remarkable resemblance to the Oberleutnant Hans Kloss, who is in their captivity. Kolicki takes his identity and, as an agent of Soviet and later Polish intelligence, penetrates the structures of the Nazi army, steals much valuable information, and together with the members of the resistance, carries out numerous diversion actions. The series was immediately very successful, watched by an average of 90% of the TV audience at the time. Stanisław Mikulski, the actor who created the leading role, was very successful too. After the release of More Than Life at Stake, as well as later on, the researchers and film critics wondered what elements made up for the success of the series. They appreciated well-written screenplays, a suspenseful plot, excellent direction, photography, music, and acting. For example, the aforementioned Mikulski and Emil Karewicz in the role of Hermann Brunner, an SS officer, the sworn enemy of Kloss. However, there were also other factors. Antonina Kłoskowska, a critical sociologist and cultural scholar, stated in her book Socjologia Kultury, Sociology of Culture, that the reason for the popularity of More Than Life at Stake was a reference to numerous motifs rooted in the canon of Polish literature. First of all, the protagonist, fearless, skilled, devoted to the cause, and forced to act in a hostile environment, embodied all the values represented in Poland by the characters of the trilogy by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Much earlier, shortly after the series' release, Krzysztof Theodor Teplitz, a well-known film critic and cultural journalist, mentioned this fact. Although he disliked this series, he praised one point. According to him, previously the heroes of Polish war films were sent to prisons or concentration camps, died on the fronts, or during espionage or the actions of the resistance. They also had to experience suffering and or difficulties during the war. Captain Kloss stood in contradiction to this narrative. He traveled all over Europe, Poland, the Third Reich, France, and even Turkey. He was surrounded by beautiful women, drank expensive alcohol, yet fulfilled all the duties to his homeland while defeating the Nazi on their territory. Stanisław Mikulski's opinion is quite similar. He said that the series was an antidote to the many war films in which the characters suffered and died. And according to Professor Piotr Zwierzchowski, the author of Cinema of New Memory, Image of World War II in Polish Cinema of the 60s, the series was an excellent example of film genre with a very strongly outlined figure of the main character made in accordance to creating works of popular culture. And the great success of the show in Poland has also been backed by numerous foreign achievements of the TV series. On the left, you can see an article from the Polish daily Express Wieczorny. The journalist reported the success of the series on Czechoslovak television and the meeting with Stanisław Mikulski in Prague. During this meeting, when Mikulski appeared in the doorway, the whole audience rose to their feet and a hurricane of applause wouldn't end. The middle article, entitled Absolute Success, describes Mikulski's visit to Yugoslavia. The journalist stated that the actor has seen more mass admiration in Zagreb and Belgrade than many renowned Western stars, e.g. Gerard Philippe. Finally, the article on the right describes the extraordinary success of the show on Swedish television. According to its author, the series was recognized as the best entertainment program of Swedish television in 1970. Its audience rating exceeded the famous TV series The Saint, with Roger Moore in the leading role. All these elements caused the management of Polish television to wonder about the possibility of creating further episodes of Modern Life at Stake. In 1970 and 1971, it has been decided that Captain Kloss will appear once again on TV screens. However, the screenwriters Andrzej Szypulski and Zbigniew Safian decided to move Captain Kloss to a slightly different period of time. They developed the screenplays for the TV series The Wolf's Trail. In the script of 13 episodes, Captain Kloss was to prosecute war criminals. For example, he would track down Dr. Józef Mengele in Argentina. These ideas were partially used for another TV series. I want to talk about the TV series Hot Life, which was shot in the second half of the 70s and released in 1979. As you can see, it was made almost by the same crew as Modern Life at Stake. The same director Andrzej Koniec, the same screenwriters, the same director of photography, and the music composer. Only the main character and the actor have changed. Instead of Captain Kloss and Stanisław Mikulski, the viewers met the journalist Maj, played by Leszek Teleszyński. He accidentally finds the footsteps of a criminal organization W, which includes former SS officers and war criminals. This organization deals, among other things, with drug and weapon trafficking or eliminating people threatening the capitalist order. The series was made in cooperation with several socialist film studios. It didn't share much of a connection with Modern Life at Stake, apart from the same filmmakers, as I mentioned. However, The screenplays published by the Radio and Television Publishing House already contained some references to the adventures of Captain Kloss. Journalist May was to cooperate with the Chief Commission for Investigation of Hitlerite Crimes in Poland. One of its employees was Stanisław Moczulski, and this is the name of the main character of More Than Life at Stake in the novels of the same title published in the early 70s. Not Stanisław Kolicki like in series, but Stanisław Moczulski. And that's not the end. The head of the organization W was a former Gestapo officer Gebhardt. The screenplays suggested it was an alternative name of Hermann Brunner, who, as you remember, was the greatest enemy of Captain Kloss. These references to More Than Life at Stake didn't appear in a final version, they were only in the scripts. On the other hand, Andrzej Koniec used some interesting casting choices. He engaged Stanisław Mikulski to play the villain, an international murderer and an associate of the organization W, and Emil Karewicz played a positive character, a French pilot and collaborator of journalist May, murdered by the organization W. The series Hot Life was met with straightforward negative reception by film critics. It was seen as a blundering attempt to create a series similar to James Bond films, and it's worth to note that James Bond films couldn't be distributed in Polish People's Republic. Today, the series Hot Life is still perceived as a desire to create a series competing with Western productions, also as an example of kitsch or pastiche. After 1989, political changes did not change the cult status of Captain Kloss. The first broadcast of the series after 1989 took place in August 1991, as reported by Gazeta Wyborcza. The director of the Warsaw Television Center even stated that it's better to show More Than Life at Stake instead of new films that often present an insufficient level of artistry. Still, the series about the adventures of Captain Kloss was the subject of research taking up mass culture and popular culture. On the slide, you can see an excerpt from an article by Professor Mirosław Pęczak, a cultural scientist and media expert, who considered More Than Life at Stake as a perfect example of mass culture creation, complying with the vast majority of the features of such a work. However, after 1989, More Than Life at Stake and the crew that made it, especially screenwriters, had to face a slightly different model of reception. They were accused of historical forgery and of implementing ideological guidelines of the Communist Party. Such allegations were made very often in the 90s. Today, they are vanishing and rarely appear in press or television materials and statements. However, at the beginning of the 21st century, the Polish press informed that More Than Life at Stake will be turned into a feature film. Its director was supposed to be Władysław Pasikowski, perhaps the most famous director of Polish cinema of the 90s, who directed the greatest and the most exciting action and war films. Pasikowski was also the author of a script. He used the motifs known from the original series and the setting of World War II, but the script was free of historical distortions. Zbigniew Safian and Andrzej Szypulski protested against these screenplays. Furthermore, they claimed that they are the sole owners of the rights to Hans Kloss' character, and any attempts of making any production using that character will face their objection. At the same time, Szypulski and Safian wrote 12 episodes of the television series entitled Old Feuds. The series was set in the 70s. Stanisław Kolicki leads a quiet life of a pensioner, but is forced to retake the role of Kloss and fight another duel with Brunner. In 2001, Safian, Szypulski, and Pasikowski reached an agreement. The media reported that Captain Kloss would be the protagonist of both the feature film and TV series. The action of both production will take place during the World War II, and television episodes would complement the original TV series from 60s. Much interest was also created not only by the plot, but also by the potential cast. The role of Captain Kloss was to be played by Michał Żebrowski, a hugely popular actor of the young generation who played the leading role in the film With Fire and Sword by Jerzy Hoffman, an adaptation of the first part of trilogy by Henryk Sienkiewicz. The role of Brunner was to be portrayed by Bogusław Linda. A director of photography of both feature film and TV series was to be Paweł Edelman, regular collaborator of Roman Polański. The former creators of More Than Life at Stake, Stanisław Mikulski, Zbigniew Safian, and Andrzej Szypulski, spoke favorably about this production. Safian even claimed that the new episodes would be much more interesting than those already shot. However, the producers ensured that the new show would maintain the ambience of the original and they will not change the hero's traits. After numerous announcements, the discussion about shooting the film and TV series has died down. Neither production has been filmed, and it could seem that nothing would change in the following years. However, at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century was made a feature film Hans Kloss, More Than Death at Stake. Its director is Patryk Wega, whose films are often nominated or awarded with Snakes, our version of the Golden Raspberries Awards. The co-author of the screenplay was Władysław Pasikowski. The film was produced by the same company that wanted to make the movie and series in 2001. The film took place in two settings, the first one in 1945 in Königsberg, where Captain Kloss witnesses the Amber Room export, and in the 70s, when Kloss finds the traces of the place where the treasure was hidden and fights another duel with Brunner. Patryk Wega announced in press interviews that his film would resemble such films as Saving Private Ryan or Casino Royale. He also ensured that Kloss and Brunner were heroes of his childhood and that making this film was for him a return to his teenage years and the excitement of watching the episodes of More Than Life at Stake. In More Than Death at Stake, the roles of Kloss and Brunner in 1945 were portrayed by two extremely popular contemporary Polish actors, Tomasz Kot on the left and Piotr Adamczyk second on the left. They were, of course, partnered by Stanisław Mikulski and Emil Karewicz. The first one was very pleased with the result. He claimed that Hans Kloss' More Than Death at Stake will be a film that connects generations, fans of the original production and young people who don't know the original series. On the other hand, Emil Karewicz was much more skeptical. He claimed that the cooperation with the director was not successful, and as a result, he could not create the character he wanted. The film was also coolly received by film critics. They appreciated pageantry manifested primarily in numerous pyrotechnic effects. On the other hand, the film was criticized mainly for the lack of suspense necessary in such a production. Zdzisław Pietrasik claimed that in one episode of the old TV series, the excitement was more than here in more than 100 minutes. The genre ambiguity of the film was also raised. Critics wondered whether it should be a pastiche or realistic action cinema. One of the good points of the film was the roles of Stanisław Mikulski and Emil Karewicz. On the other hand, the roles played by Tomasz Kot and Piotr Adamczyk were judged rather negatively. However, this was not the last appearance of Hans Kloss in popular culture. In 2014, the board game More Than Life at Stake, using the themes known from the series, was created. At the turn of the first and second decades of the 21st century, in Katowice operated the Hans Kloss Museum. Though it lasted only a few years, it collected props from the television series, wax figures of the main characters, and photos from the set of the series. For many years, there has been also a fan club of More Than Life at Stake. People who have joined the club who have joined the club prepare various articles and publications about the series and organize tours of places where More Than Life at Stake was shot. The image of Captain Claus sometimes appears on t-shirts and in memes. It is also worth noting that the film Hans Claus More Than Death at Stake wasn't the only show that established or continued television productions from the Polish People's Republic. From time to time, such shows appear on the channels of Polish television. For example, such TV series like 40-latek, 40 Years Old Man, and Alternatywy 4, or a popular science show from the 70s and 80s, Sonda, were adapted to new times, forms, and conventions. Unfortunately, these productions were not much of a success and in some cases met with openly unfavorable reception by both critics and the audience. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So it was a lot of information. I open the discussion, and everybody who want to answer the question. No.
Okay, maybe I can be the first one. Oh, okay, maybe someone else.
Piotr, you want to ask something?
Thank you. I have a question for Jarek Grzechowiak. You didn't mention the comedy mini TV series Halo Hans, not with Mite's numbers. The title itself refers to the name of the hero of the stake and the famous quote from this series. And the series did not elicit almost any reaction. Could the mere reference to Hans Claus was not enough? Was less serious? What do you think about this? And I think that Dead at Stake was a poor movie, but the beginning was brilliant. Asking who is the agent sounded like Lekar asked, but all the film is very poor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Piotr. Of course, I agree with you about the More Than Death at Stake. It's a very poor movie, and it didn't raise a much of audience in cinemas. But according to your first question about Halo Hans and that sitcom, yes, I forgot to mention about that. Of course, there was that sitcom in Polsat in I think 2011 or 2012. I don't remember right now. Actually, I watched only one episode of that, so it's hard for me to say something about the sitcom. But yes, I agree with you that the audience also didn't like the series. There was only one season, if I remember well, and of course it's another example of existence of Hans Claus in popular culture in 21st century.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anna, you want to? Tim, you want to ask? And Valentina. Tim.
Yes, I actually have a question for Anna, so she can also ask her question after the answer. It's a question about Wysotsky. And if I understood correctly, there is in this film an attempt to sort of resurrect the figure through a fiction. And this reminded me of other cultural icons whose deaths are not accepted by the fans, like Elvis in the United States. And I just wondered, is there any such discourse around this icon of sort of he's still alive in some way? And it also made me wonder about, in that respect, the question of how there's all these Elvis impersonators. And And the question of what, when you double something, if you try to make it too authentic, it somehow doesn't work. And yet this Elvis is an interesting case of a dissemination through doubling. So he's sort of omnipresent, but also never really there. And then the last, I'll add a tip. If you know, there's an East German film made in the same years called Gundermann about a singer that might be interesting to you from a comparative perspective.
Yes, thank you very much for your question and for the film advice for some kind of comparative studies. Basically, as for this discourse of their idol still being alive after his death, I think it's more relevant to Tsoi than Vysotsky at the moment, because Tsoi died in the auto catastrophe, almost in the age of 27, not exactly, but almost. And maybe because it was not so long ago, I don't know exactly. It was this the very end of Soviet Union, and there, the saying that Tsoi is alive, Tsoi żyw. Yeah, if you go to any Russian, I think any post-Soviet city, basically, somewhere you can see this sign somewhere on the wall. And this is kind of phenomenon which is quite interesting, that Tsoi is still very important figure, even for younger generation. Like, my brother, who is 10 years younger than me, just like a year ago he discovered, and he is this fan of Viktor Tsoi, who watched this film and said that no, it's not the same, the voice is not the same, the appearance is not the same, and he can't accept this. So this whole idea of this idol, I think, is more relevant comparing to this Western phenomena in case with Tsoi than with Vysotsky. But of course, Vysotsky stays this very important figure for maybe even more generations, and not only in Russian culture, but also in some other post-Soviet countries, post-socialist countries like in Poland, as I see it now. Yes, I guess so. So can I ask my question now, or maybe I can wait?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I have a question for my colleagues from Berlin. Staying with this topic of rock and roll, I see that there was this different point of view, but you also saw this importance of this impact of West culture, and how it is seen. And I was thinking about, because one of my experiences here was presenting Russian rock to my students, my colleagues in Poland, the first reaction is always that it doesn't sound like rock and roll at all, especially when it's Tsoi, when it's Mike, when it's Grebenshikov. This first reaction is this surprise. Why do you think it's rock and roll? So my question is, how would you, being somehow, as far as I understood, outside originally from this Russian culture, how would you describe why it is still a rock and roll? And can you tell something more about this aspect? Because in film we hear this version of soundtrack of those songs by Tsoi and Mike, how it could sound if they had the same possibilities like the Western colleagues. Yeah, you can hear it clearly during the concert, during the roof scene, when we hear this song "Moje настроение." Yeah, this the difference of the sound, how it could be if it was a true Western rock and roll, and how was the actual sound with the possibilities. This different actually is kind of important to me, to the whole picture, the whole plot, and to this question, how to identify this genre rock and roll in this world of Leningrad rock club. Thank you.
Okay.
There are a lot of questions at once. Try to.
That's the film.
Yes. I will first use examples from the film, and then you can maybe go. So basically, the type of rock and roll there, I guess there's really a lot of variants: punk, post-punk, new wave, gothic, and Victor is a kind of Troy is a kind of character also in the film. There's a rehearsal scene. I don't know if you remember, and he was questioned by his old band members, like. He says, "What is this? It's a bit childish. It's not punk. This is not rock. And who are you?" And Troy doesn't like the tone, and he doesn't want anybody to change his song, doesn't want to change his style. He just stormed out of the room, and he doesn't want to be categorized, and he wants to stay this kind of a combination. Like, of course, it's an influence from the Western prototype, the original rock, but he draws the inspiration from Russian songwriting traditions and also folk tradition and a lot of combinations. So maybe at first sight, it sounds a little bit exotic in more Western atmosphere, but in a way, I guess it is what he wants. He wants it to be special, to be unique, to be his style, to be Russian.
Yeah, so that was more on the film. I think more generally speaking, yeah? let's speak about culture, and let's speak about how its reflection on society. I understand that it's difficult for non-Russian audiences or non-Soviet audience even to place this phenomenon of the Soviet rock scene. I think it's important to stress, and the movie is stressing that, and we try to stress that also in our analysis, that there is a development. Yeah. So you have the rise from the 60s onwards, and it becomes looser and looser and looser. Yeah. And at a certain moment, this rock spirit, in the sense of breaking the law and we cross boundaries, is present, and that is then in our view what Soy represents, and that comes very close to what I would say this is rock, to my interpretation then. But the question is, would it be different if the circumstances would have been different? I don't know that. I first of all, I don't consider rock as something, okay, it might have originated in the West, but therefore it's not necessarily Western. The Western stamp, I see it as a more international stamp. It has, of course, Western characteristics in the beginning, but I think it's everywhere in the world, whether it is in China or in the Soviet Union or in contemporary Russia. Rock has its own stamp. So I don't know. I think that's a difficult question about the circumstances.
One more thing to add, I don't watch a lot of Western rock films, but if I remember well, most of the time, anything related to that, biographies of rock musicians or just musicians, usually picture kind of glamour life or a lot of parties, sex. You don't really see that in this film. It's really based on the very Soviet mise en scène, the communal apartments, how the lives, that all the people are living together, and they are still working in the factory as their proper job. So I guess every aspect that is different is part of their identity. And what I see here, of course, maybe it's not very professional definition of rock, but it's just the spirit, like what they are expressing through their music is really making their music rock. So that's my interpretation.
There is no professional definition of rock, actually. There are many varieties. Thank you.
If I can, Arkadiusz, can I immediately not counter?
Yes, of course.
Ask the question. I was also to Anna. What do you think about the not so or the quite recent movie, Uchitel's movie Tsoi? How do you, which also was quite controversial both by critics' views and in general the public. How would you place that in your analysis?
Okay, I have to confess I haven't seen it yet. I have this in my plans, but I've read some critical reviews telling that toy is used there more kind of a figure as like more a symbol of the epoch, but I can't be very sure here because I haven't seen it yet, but I have this in plan. Yeah, I have to do it.
Okay, if I may mention about one Polish movie connected with your topic, All That I Love. There is the story about a rock band in 80s. It's fictional story, but I think it's more or less very common with this kind of movie about 80s, about rock stars and so on. Valentina, you want to ask some questions?
Yes, thank you. My question is for the authors of the first two presentations. You focused on how the cultural heroes have been presented in the movies, but I would like to shift our attention to the representation of Soviet material culture. And to clarify my question, I would make reference to the mini-series Chernobyl. Many professional critics and general audience, among advantages of this mini-series, they said they distinguish the authenticity of representing Soviet time, which added tremendously to success of this mini-series, like representation of urban space, interiors, clothes, and so on and so on. So here is my question: how Soviet material culture is portrayed in the movies you analyzed, and how it's contributed to the portraying, to the making details to the portrait of the cultural heroes. Thank you.
Anna?
Do you want to be the first? I don't know.
You want to answer?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Actually, this all is, I think, is equally important part of this world, the whole world depicted there. Yes, as I mentioned, maybe not so clear that those culture heroes are seen there primarily as part of this whole epoch, yeah, of this whole era, especially with Vysotsky, yeah, where they were trying to do it in a more documentary way, maybe than Serebrennikov still. I remember all those comments in this documentary after the summer that I mentioned, when they tell that, oh, maybe it was in some interviews, that Natalia, who was one of the consultings of the whole process, that she entered that flat that they reconstructed for the movie, saw Roma Zver in the costume of Mike, her dead husband, and just lost her words. That for her, it was like the entry into her real past. At least they refer to this experience like this. So it's hard to tell whether it is so accurate as with Chernobyl series. Maybe it's different, but it definitely was one of the goals to create the whole atmosphere, let's say, yeah, the whole kind of memory thing, or maybe even not memory, maybe even some kind of commonplaces, yeah, recognizable for the general audience. And yeah, that's it basically.
Okay, Steven, Eric, you want to add something?
Yes, I might take the question. It's a good question. I have to admit that I didn't watch Chernobyl yet, but I will do it now. No, I think material culture, in the sense that I understand it, plays of course a very important role. what specifically comes into my mind thinking about this is the black and white mise en scène, and especially the focus on the underground subculture. So the way the subculture is depicted and portrayed in terms of accuracy. We are, I'm afraid, a little bit too young to have the full picture on that, but maybe some of the colleagues will have, and that's maybe a reverse question. Is for example the idea of groupies, and the ideas of audiences going crazy. And then different depicted with then Mike and Victor Tsoi throughout the movie is something which maybe could be a detour of reality. I don't know, but affirmative, yes, it plays an important role, and especially material culture associated to the subculture. I would say. I don't know if that answers the question or is useful.
I think that it also could be connected with the budget of these movies, and I think that the director, the people who made Chernobyl, got a lot of money to do that, and in this particular moment, the background is maybe sometimes better when you've got a lot of money. Valerie, you want to ask the question or not? Because I'm confused a little bit. You raised the hand.
Yes, I have a question to Yaroslav. Yaroslav, you told about two films, one old film about Hans Kloss and one new film about Hans Kloss. First film, as I understood correctly, was accused of communism ideology. But which ideology provides the new film? Can you outline it in 2 words?
As I remember, there was no communist ideology in the new film in Hans Kloss' Modern Death at Stake. It appears, of course, in the original series, Modern Life at Stake, and the friendship between Poland and Soviet Union and cooperation of Polish and Soviet intelligence. But of course, in Modern Life, in Modern Death at Stakes, there appear Soviet officers and Soviet soldiers. But it was less ideological, of course, than in case of the original series from '60s.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Claudia, you next.
Yes, thank you, Arkadiusz. I have a question for Kevin and Eric. The late Soviet underground culture was a counterculture, subculture, which was dominated by masculine patterns of behavior and performances, and especially the rock scene. It is redressed in today cultural studies, for example. So this gender sensibility is a very important point today. I just wanted, maybe you can recapitulate your thesis. I'm interested in how far it is redressed in later, reinforced or subverted or made ambivalent, or maybe simplified. I think it is simplified, and in which direction. It seems to me, it seems to be ambivalent indeed in this film, but maybe you can comment on this briefly. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, that's actually also a focus for further research, to look deeper into these gender aspects of the underground scene. And I'm very interested actually to see to hear later, after we answer, your perspective on how that translates in contemporary times. But yes, what we notice, we try to frame it then as a generational conflict between two masculinity models, but that there is indeed a difference between what we see as Mike being part of the first, maybe even second wave of the underground, and then Victor coming in as something completely different, as the opening of the last wave, which, to connect to Anna's question, would then be the original. There is no, we agreed that there is no original definition of rock, but which is more disconnected from the government. There was relaxation, specifically on Soviet rock music. So yes, we see a difference in tones, and what I would say is that there is a more essentialist approach towards this latest masculinity representation. So how Victor is portrayed, or how he comes into the scene. So it is ambiguous in my view.
In the same time, also sometimes it's contradictory. I remember Mike is also conscious of his own problem, his powerless, his complicit with the authorities, but in the same time, he doesn't change it. And in the end, he also went to Moscow to pursue a kind of more commercial path of career, like more like commercial concerts and this kind of thing. So as you said, the portrait in the film is a little bit more simplified, but I think with a kind of intention, the director's intention to express a certain message, and that's why he kind of simplified and give a kind of essentialist and very opposing two opposing masculinity ideals to express his opinion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, I didn't see.
I have a question for Yaroslav, if I may. Because you also, when you were talking about this new version, you mentioned this situation with Polish actors, famous Polish actors who played several well-known roles. So my question is, do you have the solution? Because I still don't have the one that would satisfies me, what to do with this situation when we have the actor playing some kind of important role, and we know that he played several other significant roles and just can't stop thinking about it. Like, you know, like with Piotr Adamczyk, who is the Pope Karol Wojtyla, but at the same time is the character of many silly Polish comedies, or Karol, for example, yeah? What to do with this imposing, you know, all of those different contexts of this Bogusław Linda? I think it's also some kind of a strong emotion of the audience. Do you have any methodological tools to explain this?
Well, it's a difficult question. I didn't expect it actually. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, of course, Tomasz Kot and Piotr Adamczyk are really very, very popular actors, and they played like Tomasz Kot. He played Zbigniew Religa, of course, in Bogowie, a feature film about Professor Religa. Piotr Adamczyk played Pope John Paul II, then Brunner in Hans Kloss, and then O Karol. I don't know. I don't know because you asking about how to I don't know how to classify them, or how to maybe could you clarify the question for me if you need?
Maybe not to classify, you know, but how to call this process of perception when you have this different kind of context. I know sometimes it seems not important, but we know that for general audience, this is an important context. So I don't have an answer myself, and I asked different people, and they also didn't have this answer. So that was my question.
So I'm sorry, Anna. I think I couldn't help too. I'm very sorry.
Okay, so the question stays with me.
I think that it's two levels of this question and two levels of methodological approach to this problem. The first level will be the level of authors. There is some point when authors, director or screenwriter use these past roles of these actors to build the character. And the second level is the level of audience. There is the important for the audience that Mikulski played the Hans Kloss, and he was always the Hans Kloss character, even if he played any other characters. So I think it should be treated in two different levels. The first level, there is some point that authors want to use this image. For example, it's the same when we talk about, I don't know, actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who make a lot of movies like Terminator and so on, but he also made a movie like Junior, if you remember, when Schwarzenegger was pregnant. So it's the role who played the role in this moment when we play with the actors' emploi and so on. And in other movies, it's not important that Schwarzenegger play any different role. So I think it could be something like that.
Maybe it is worth to note, according to Mikulski, that after Modern Life at Stake, he didn't get an interesting proposition from the film directors, and the last role he played in a feature film was Hans Kloss in Modern Death at Stake. But in 1980 he played in Stanisław Bareja's comedy Teddy Bear, Miś. He played Wujek Dobrorada, so kind of
was episode.
Yeah, it was an episode of a militia officer who cooperates with a group of children and try to educate them about not using the vulgarisms or something like that. So it was a kind of sarcastic character, and Mikulski played it with very pleasure.
But when we talk about this role of Mikulski, it's also second role, important role of Mikulski, Pan Samochodzik.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's also connected with the second role. Okay, we talk about films of our children. Okay, I think that is not further questions. So thank you very much for the very interesting papers, for the very interesting speeches. So we've got 1 hour and 20 minutes of breaks. So maybe you can eat some dinner or something like that. And we meet in 2:40 in Moscow time. And we must calibrate our watches to be present in the next literature panel. Thank you very much.